the wall to the future. How art can use feelings for time to co-produce space and society. Olafur Eliasson, Universität der Künste Berlin.
When the wall came down, I was in Copenhagen, and I decided to drive to Berlin immediately.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I'm very excited about being in such prominent company. Yesterday evening, some of us met, and one of the guests asked me, or told me that he was disappointed with my speech, as he understood everything and he thought I was an artist. And one of the reasons why I say yes to talking at occasions like this, obviously, is that I am, let's say, on a mission to demystify art and suggest that art obviously has a valuable and relevant contribution to make in society. I think it is, it's not a question about whether one can, let's say, change art and make it more adaptable, but I think it is certainly a question about whether one can, let's say, make the language or the way we all, let's say, engage in art more understandable. And I then told my friend that I thought it was a success, having said something that he actually understood, and he saw that as a sort of a failure, and in a sense that was all in all, let's say, a kind of a nice combination of success and failure being one thing, and we went on into something less relevant, whether that was arty or not. But clearly I would like to suggest that a work of art, or let's say an art object, some people would call it, is not, or has not been the predominant idea for a while now. I think a set of relationships, an experience, a situation, the expectations you have, the memory you have, that all together performs a set of art, or a work of art. The work of art could be your sense of gravity in this space, if I say it is. A work of art obviously is a, let's say, a negotiable size. And it's been like this for a while, and therefore obviously art has been exercising, let's say, principles of negotiation. Art has, I think, been interested in methodological principles to the extent of how do we both say something, how do we both see something, and within the way we say the thing, also investigate the language with which we say it. Or when we see something, how do we also see the glasses or the mind through which we see what we see? Some of that has been a topic already in this panel. And I think obviously that this whole principle of seeing, and seeing what, how we see as one vision is an incredibly interesting one. I have my studio here in Berlin. There's around 40 to 50 people working there, mostly highly sophisticated people, and helping me to, so let's say, amplify the ideas that we want to attend. We have a studio within the studio, within the laboratory. The school is a part of the university, and the same thing goes for the school. How do we, create a sort of educational framework where we both have a process of learning, but where we also have investigation of learning how to learn, and that inside the same thing. So in that sense, we call it an art school, but essentially we are both, obsessed with, let's say, the performativity of the critical inquiry, but we also would like to, let's say, co-produce or be in dialogue with the world, I could say. I have a small, maybe more anecdotal way of saying this, because we start in the school typically to talk about when one think about the history of lime or kalk. Lime, obviously, as one found out in the early alchemy, has a disinfective quality when it comes to wounds and healing. And in the, let's say, early medicine, when we chop off limbs during warfare, we would lime the space to keep bacterial control active, and so on and so forth. So quickly hospitals became, you would wash it with lime after cleaning it or watering it down, and lime became this sort of symbol of kind of maintaining some hygienic, let's say, status. And obviously when medicine and city planning and architecture later on caught on, the color of lime took up space as being, let's say, the cleaner color. in this sense, also the Protestant, Lutheran Protestant church took on this idea in Northern European to have white churches, you know, would have it limed inside and so on and so forth. Today, I, as an artist, work in museums around the world, and I am always working in white, what you call white cubes, white spaces. Galleries are white, museums are white, everything's in that sense white. We take it for granted as being a natural color for a museum. Clearly, I think it is interesting for any student or anybody really to think about, well, you look at a painting on a wall that you might mistakenly think is naturally white. What would have happened had, let's say, lime been yellow from the beginning? Maybe there is an argument here about the, let's say, the inability to see things culturally, and we take them for granted being naturally. And let's say there is an issue here of to what extent do we exercise our ability to negotiate the constructed nature of the reality around us. Art, I think, have always been obsessed with this. This is not a new story also about the lime. We have in the studio done sometimes now already an experimental forum, a little bit like the one here, I don't know whether I should say more or less intimate, nevertheless a bit different. And we started out calling it life in space. So how does life in space, you know, go about? And we from there went on to call it life as space. And we are now, after having done it a few times, calling it life is space. Do you see this sort of phenomenological approach, the way we play around it in the studio? I have some pictures. I will start running through some of them of my work, showing some works of art and a few photos from my studio as well. The relativity of reality being a topic here, a green river dyed with an environmentally friendly color. This is Tokyo before it was Stockholm, right around the parliament. The definition of reality is obviously something we talk about. Putting green color in the river in Stockholm, I would say, is, I think, amplifying the quality of the water. It makes it more real than it was before. It also makes it into a picture, you could argue. Interestingly, the police and the newspaper the following day could report that there was a leak in the heating system of the governmental building. And in that sense, let's say, reality was preserved in the minds. Whereas obviously it was a kind of experiment with the space. To what extent can I create or alter space? How can I intensify, in this case, the public space? Now this is Tokyo. This is an experiment in Berlin, collecting driftwood in Iceland, distributing it. Had there been a, let's say, a flood leaving the woods around in the city. And this is my studio. So the whole idea of how does one establish a dialogue between art and society, the whole idea that I think art has something valuable to contribute with, led to a sort of a process of working for me, which I found interesting, where dematerializing the traditional work of art became important, suggesting that fluidity and relationships are in fact quite capable of, let's say, discussing space, discussing public space, and discussing responsibility, if you want. And the whole argument, of course, first started within what normally is considered art, which is, let's say, objecthood in the traditional sense. And if I could dematerialize it, make a waterfall or rainbow, maybe some fog, if I could make it hard for people to actually pin down the object, I could also amplify the sense that the relationship is more important. The relationship being important obviously means that the singular experience is incredibly important. This means that the difference between your experience and my experience becomes sort of a driver of what determines the work of art. The whole idea of a sort of non-normative seeing machine I thought was quite exciting, as sort of a nice statement, especially as experiences, as we know it, has become a part of market economy, and experiences, of course, within the market economy, in the way it has been presented to us the last 5 years at least, has very much to do with you can buy a certain experience. You can buy a coffee experience, for instance. And buying a coffee experience obviously thinks about an experience being out there in the coffee, and the person is just this sort of numb person somehow acquiring experiences. Obviously within art, we would like to suggest, well, the person obviously is this experience machine, phenomenologically speaking, and so on. And I think we need to kind of preserve let's say, sense of responsibility here and fight the numbness that one could claim that placing the experience in the product or in the object would somehow would risk the danger of generalizing the way we experience our surroundings. That would again create numbness, and I talk about numbness in the sense that empathy and compassion was a theme earlier today. And obviously I would like to suggest let's support this idea of emotionalization, the idea that things can be negotiated, and in order to kind of sustain an argument within this negotiation, you need to also have a sense of what does it mean to be emotional. I think in that sense, I think art has, a valuable argument that we can be different and we can be together. We can be incredibly different, like here tonight, and yet we can create a sense of collectivity. The whole idea that we can experience based on our singularity, and yet we can still produce a society, or we can produce a sort of mechanism or methodological principle for how to reevaluate democracy as we go along, is something that I find highly relevant, very interesting, and maybe not something that has been fully, I think, appreciated as we see the lack of confidence to democracy as such, the kind of indifference that one finds in the world today in terms of should I vote or should I not vote, or does it really matter, or let's say the degree of abstraction within politics. Suddenly the whole idea of emotionalization is just not about a state of feeling, it is, let's say, a process of how one is a part of society. So another small, let's say, anecdote about the sort of the principle, it's the one which is, I refer to Bruno Latour, the thinker, when talking about explicitation or making things explicit. This whole idea that you, in this case, somehow I feel it hits a nice string, that you have the First World War, the trenches, in this case the German and the French, and they're shooting at each other, as you know, and so on and so forth. And at some point, and I don't know what side, and I don't want to be prejudiced, some of them gets the idea to create a gas cloud and sends it over, and obviously it hits the other. Maybe if somebody knows, you should send me a note in this little phone system here. You can tell me when I sit up there, because I often wondered who it was. But nevertheless, so here we are, right? War trenches, and there's this gas cloud suddenly coming over, and breathing suddenly becomes a part of the war. What we took for granted as being totally natural, being non-negotiable, in this case the environment, the air we breathe, became explicit. With some success, I think art can work in the same way. It can show us things that we fail to negotiate or we fail to see as being explicit. Clearly now the great challenge with the environmental situation is how do we suddenly make the environment explicit? I mean, we talk a lot about it. The greatest challenge is let's say, translating it from the state of being abstract. It's very hard to kind of, what can I actually do as a person? And how do I make it from, take it from abstraction and make it explicit, make it real? So the whole idea of the felt experience, not the bought experience, the whole idea of what does it mean to, let's say, renegotiate your experiential conditions. Like in this case, I asked people to find their own way. This is in China, in a sort of in a mapped color foggy space where the traditional perpendicular rules of defining space has been dissolved, and you're now walking around in a color fog. This does not mean you cannot orient yourself. This just means you have to reinvent the principles of orientation, and by doing so, it's maybe not so interesting that the new orientation actually works. It is interesting to have the experience that the old way of orienting ourselves was a construction. It can change. So showing something like this, or making this kind of experience, or making this work of art, I think not only produces a new reality or somehow negotiates the existing reality, it also shows that the former one is actually negotiable, but it's not as real as we might have thought it was. And in that sense, I have felt happy or lucky to be a part of situations where I could create a space like the one we see here, in which people would meet. Within the process of meeting, they would start negotiating what are the rules for how do we actually meet, how do we come together. And clearly people in this case were having a personal experience. you could say singularity was an issue. They were there alone, but they were there alone with other people. So I think there was a sort of an element in this which pleased me a lot, that you could be singular, plural at the same time. I think this is a nice place to end it, and I thank you for listening.